good enough for a take. Some smaller features of this then that I think are of interest. Well, they're of interest to me at any rate. And one of them is the way in which this story, even more than the ones preceding it, replicates the sort of confused conflict between good and evil that we would see on the battlefield of the First and Second World Wars, where we want to appeal to bravery and cowardice, and we'll call people who flee cowards, and we'll talk about people who are in the trenches as brave. But when you're in the trenches, I mean, it does take a degree of bravery to stick with it, but you don't actually see your enemy. You don't get to fight him like a knight on a battlefield. You're caught and you're lobbing shells, grenades, whatever, at great distances, and largely you're huddling, trying to avoid being destroyed. And when you come up out of the trenches, as Lewis would have, in the muck and the grime, it's rather shabby and not particularly valorous what goes on in the battlefields. It's gruesome and confused, and it's a charge, and it's not, you don't see, as you see in the Tolkien and Lewis films of the battles, they're arrayed in lines, and there's a trumpet, and there's the, you know, and the sun rises and it's glorious, and there's order and there's chaos, and it's an orderly charge and so forth. You don't get that in the books. You don't get that. It's confusion. It's like going out of the trenches and running at your enemy, and you don't see the bullet that hits you. You hear the bomb explode, you see pieces of bodies flying in the air, but you don't actually see your enemy even. You're just shooting. You're lucky if you see who you hit. You're shooting at a position, but again, films have it as the sniper, you see ahead, whatever. I think most of the shooting you're not seeing like that. You're running, you're shooting indiscriminately. That's how Lewis portrays the battle in the last battle. It's a confused struggle. So when Eustace is fighting, it says, the fox lay dead at Eustace's own feet, and he wondered if it was he who had killed it. He doesn't even know. He's wildly slashing, trying to fight, but at this point, this is not even a playground fight. It's just mayhem. And later, when the Narnians are being overwhelmed by the Calormenes, here's an extract. Tyrion knew he could do nothing for the others now. They were all doomed together. He vaguely saw the boar go down on one side of him and Jewel the unicorn fighting fiercely on the other. Out of the corner of one eye he saw, but only just saw, a big Calormene pulling Jill away somewhere by her hair. But he had hardly thought about any of these things. Tyrion soon found that he was getting further and further to the right, nearer to the stable. He's getting moved there. He had a vague idea in his mind that there was some good reason for keeping away from it. But he couldn't now remember what the reason was. And anyway, he couldn't help it. So there's confusion and there's brutality. It's a brutal. These are the scenes of the trenches of the two world wars that Lewis and Tolkien knew very well, and modern warfare. So we can portray it as good versus evil, and of course we will do that, in particular when the aggressor is like the Nazis and is doing such terribly brutal things. But the truth of the battles is hardly virtue versus vice. And it's traditionally cut and dried black and white portrait. It's a confused thing and a very messy thing. And the portrait of what is going on in this is similarly confused. Now, I said to you already that the battles do not portray any particular details to it either. You don't see swords going through bodies. It's not described. There's evil there. You see them going, and again, the description there, Jill being pulled away by her hair. So you just get an image of it, but you don't actually get the gory details, which would have been part of the thing that so traumatized the veterans of those wars, such that they couldn't get rid of the images the rest of their life. You get rather a confused portrait. And that's what he wants to present as the field of battle here. So, and that's in Narnia. Now, at that point, it approximates most closely a 20th century war environment. And that's why I think it's persuasive in our day. We can see fights staged like a boxing match or an MMA or whatever, where you have two opponents, you see one, you see the other, you're 4-1. But in the battlefield, it's just pele-mele all over the place. So the confusion doesn't mask the brutality, and that seems part of the perception of this battle, which seems hopeless as well. And knowing that, and Lewis knows that for many children that the suffering of animals, especially if they're sentient, is the most agonizing thought imaginable, even more so than the suffering of people. Children cannot tolerate animal cruelty. It's just, it drives them crazy, because they see the weakness of the animal, they see the vulnerability of the animal, they see that and they know they're responsible towards the fellow creatures. And so it's an instance of particular cruelty the child can identify with and draw an analogy for, and they find it particularly evil and heinous. And so when he tells us that the Narnian talking beasts, 3 dogs were killed, a 4th was hobbling behind the line on 3 legs and whimpering, and the bear lay on the ground moving feebly, and then it mumbled in its throaty voice, bewildered to the last, I don't understand, laid its big head down on the grass as quietly as a child going to sleep, and never moved again. The child's overwhelmed with grief. He could have portrayed it with human actors, doesn't, chooses to do it with children. Lewis is trying to, but the futility of this, the horror of what the child sees is aptly represented in portraying the suffering of the animals. By the way, Lewis was against experimentation on animals. Vivisection he was opposed to his whole life. And he actually also made the point that if we will do this to animals, we will do it to people. That was his point. It wasn't just that it's cruel to the animals, but that it is, if we cross, there's a sort of a sacred boundary there, that when you're experimenting on animals, you'll also experiment on people. Well, we've just talked about that experiment house. The education system, educators will think that they are entitled to do experiments on human beings. They've lost the sanctity of all life, not just human life, so much part of the pro-life movement in our day, but the sanctity of life. God has created the world. He's called it good. He's called us to be stewards over it. He's called us to guard and protect it. Do we do those things? Do we recognize the duty in doing that? So this is powerful writing, and probably the most powerful in all of the Narnia books, because it gets really visceral. And the reason he does this right at the end is to show the great reversal. Like it gets darker and darker and darker, and there's no Aslan. This is the last battle. This is the perception of Lewis's contemporaries in the 20th century. Why so many public intellectuals are atheists is because they see the real horror of war and the real horror of the consequences of their own philosophy of progressivism and a man-centered approach to life, modern nation state, etc. So he presents it in its darkest, because the dawn is coming, that he wants to show the light, how much it flips. In one instant, the humans and other creatures into a new Narnia and an everlasting kingdom, which is so much superior to the old Narnia. He wants that study in contrast. If you know the Italian artist Caravaggio, it's called chiaroscuro. There's the bright and the dark. Do you know Caravaggio? Let's see if I can find Caravaggio. Christ at the column. There you go. Very dark, very light. Oh. Go away. Uses the black to emphasize the light. It's very powerful characteristic of this. That's what I propose to you Lewis is doing here right at the end. It's getting blacker and blacker and blacker in order to enhance the light. And he's obviously leaning on the previous 6 stories, our understanding of Aslan's goodness, his power, his love, his providence in all these things. He ordains all these things. He's orchestrating everything. We have a strong sense of this in the Narnia Chronicles up to this point, and yet all of those things are absent in this story. There seems to be no providence. Even when the children are called, they fail. Where is Aslan? Where's the providence? Where's the goodness? Where's the love? It's all hidden. Hidden, hidden, hidden. It's in the black, in the background. So I think that's decisive in this portrait, and important for us to see. And it's the exact thing that he wants to create as an expression of the truths of Christian theology, for one, because it talks about the last days being dark, and when many would give up hope. He's talking about, Matthew's Gospel 24:25. In the last days, things will be like this, and they sound very, very bleak. The 20th century is very, very bleak. He is talking about that, but there's a hope that is hidden beneath that black canvas that then pops out, and it pops out through another portal. Now, I said it was a portal fantasy. Where's the portal in the story? Not at the beginning. It's in the tent. That's when the portal appears, but it's portal out rather than a portal in. So it completes the whole of the portal fantasies that are the Chronicles of Narnia, with a portal out rather than a portal in. All the portals in were signs of the portal out, even from the beginning, but we hadn't seen the portal out until this point. And it comes about through, again, the world perceives no portal there at all. They in fact perceive the antithesis of a portal. They think that it's a trap. They're going to die in there. Horrible things are going to happen. You don't want to go into that tent at all costs. No one wants to go in there. And yet when they go in there, it's sort of like, brings to mind Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich as well, when he's pushed into the black sack. He pushed through, he resists it, and he goes through down, he sees light. That sort of existential portrait, Lewis seems to be picking up on that as well. Not that I think that he is actually referring to Tolstoy, but it reminds me of that. What else do we want to talk about here? How about the dwarves and the dwarves' perception of this? Oh yeah, the dwarves who end up being for the dwarves. The dwarves are for the dwarves. They won't, and they are willing to, they don't see themselves as nobody's on my side. So I'm going to be on my own side, and I'll use either side as I see fit, and I'll defend my own identity group, the dwarves, but I'm not going to fight for the Narnians or the Calormenes or for Tash or for Aslan, because I regard all of that as propaganda on both sides. So they're very cynical, but they're also very realistic, because actually what they see is that Aslan is a fake Aslan. Like Shift has put the lion skin on Puzzle, and they see that Rishti Tarkan is in fact just an unscrupulous politician who's using religion to advance his political cause. So they're very cynical about the world, and they decide the way that they're going to deal with reality is to disbelieve everything. They are going to be the ultimate cynics. And so even when they get pushed in the tent, because they do get pushed in the tent, and then they're given food from the messianic banquet, which is there, which is full of delights. One, they can't see. They're just in the dark, because they can't even, and so the equivalent of what we saw in the silver chair, they're under the spell, but the spell themselves is the spell they've cast upon themselves, interestingly. They've so believed in the cynical portrait of God and goodness, virtue, justice, truth. They're so convinced that those things are a myth that even when they're given the food from the banquet, it tastes like excrement to them. They won't eat it. They think they're giving them crap, literally, and they won't eat it. They can't, and they cannot be persuaded. But that's because of their own thinking. They taught themselves. They've learned a lesson from the way the world is. They're clear about what the world perceives. They're not going to believe anything. They're so hardened in this belief. And in contrast to them, we have the great figure of Emeth, right? The young noble warrior on the side of the Calormenes, who is so zealous for the truth that he is willing to go into the tent. It's not just because he's brave, it's because he is pure of heart. Now, his views of God are, he's deceived about them. Lewis makes that abundantly clear. However, insofar as he believed that there was truth and he was guided by truth, and his intentions were noble and his heart was pure, insofar as he's judged to have done what was right in accordance with what he could possibly know. That's how Lewis deals with it. Ultimately, all truth is God's truth. I think he's going to have trouble with that one in terms of Christian theology, because no one comes to the Father except through the Son. Except through the Son. And you have to confess his name. You have to bow the knee. And hence the whole impetus for evangelism and the worldwide missionary movement of the 19th and 20th centuries. The reason why people go to all nations and preach the gospel is because they don't think that they're going to be saved in accordance with their limited understanding of the truth, which they may be zealous for and admirable in believing it, but is it really sufficient? At the end of the day, you can't know that, whether what Lewis says is right. What you can know is that you're told to go evangelize. That's what you were told. So could somebody be saved outside of Christ? Scripture doesn't speak of it. You can rationalize all you want, but I think even Lewis would say the thing that is of greatest necessity is obedience. So do this. And then they will know. And how will they know? They'll know by the way that you live your life in accordance with the theology of the cross. That you'll lay down your own life out of belief for the truth. That's how they'll know. That's the theologia crucis, as opposed to the theology of glory. And that's what he sees in the 20th century again. It's triumphalism, the theologia gloriae, the theology of glory, where we avoid the shame, the weakness, the folly, the condemnation, the sin, the death that we associate with the way of the cross, and instead pursue all of the things that the world perceives, and in so doing deceive ourselves and fall. So I wanted to talk about that. I also want to talk about Susan. I mentioned Susan. We should deal with that because in the end, one of the great heroes of Narnia, Queen Susan, is not coming. What's going on here? The problem of Susan, which is probably very troubling to some people. I know I've read writers that were appalled by that. I'm trying to think of the one who wrote his Dark Materials. What was his name now? He is very troubled by the idea that Susan was abandoned by Aslan in the end. He thought it was appalling. We're told that she's no longer a friend of Narnia. She doesn't appear with her brothers and sisters when they return to Narnia. That is the real Narnia. Narnia remade. She doesn't appear. And according to Jill Pohl, who we just met, she's interested in nothing nowadays except nylons and lipstick and invitations. I know who it was, Philip Pullman, his Dark Materials. And Pullman's interpretation on that is, well, Susan entered puberty and became sexually mature And that's impossible for a man like Lewis to accept, that a young woman has sexual desires and needs and whatever. And the way he deals with it is then punishing her for not being a naive little girl anymore. That's his take on it. And this is what makes Lewis such an appalling man. So appalling that Philip Pullman writes a trilogy that is the antithesis of Lewis's own sci-fi trilogy, by the way, deliberately. Most people haven't picked that up. I've written on this. But Lewis is so appalling that not only does he present Susan as wrong, he banishes her to hell, basically. And this is what people like Lewis are like. They're really mean-spirited. They have darkness in their hearts. Let me speak to this because it seems it needs to be spoken to. Because the perspective is just nonsensical, but for multiple reasons. One, it's not actually sexuality that's Susan's problem, at least not identified in the novel. That's just Pullman's supposition. Oh, it's because she's a young woman and she's interested in the opposite sex and she's a sexual revolutionary or something like that, and Lewis can't handle this. It's because she's interested in social acceptance. That's the issue. She wants to be part of the inner ring. She doesn't want to be on the out. Pull this back in. She's sort of ashamed of even the truth, which she believed. She's been there. Just as she's a bit like Edmund, but in reverse. She's ashamed of it. She wants to be grown up, because when you're an adolescent, the greatest possible good you can imagine is being grown up. And then you get to be grown up and you think, gosh, I wish I could go back. That was fun. I was rather carefree. I didn't have to worry about any things. I just did this and did that and did the next thing, and no thoughts and cares and concerns for larger things. But she wants to be grown up, and being childish from her vantage point is the worst possible thing imaginable. I don't want to be talked down to. Don't call me a girl, or let alone a little girl, or my little girl, to her father if he ever appeared, or pretty. Don't use diminutives. I want to be grown up. Take me seriously. Regard me as a woman. So she dresses that way. It's not about sex. It's about appearance. That's how I see it anyway. I think that's what Lewis is suggesting. Well, it's certainly what Jill's suggesting. She's not talking about anything else. So it's the inner ring. She wants to be in the inner ring. So the influence of the inner ring being accepted so that you're given some sort of sense of approval by the group, that's what motivates her now. Very real concerns for everyone, quite frankly, but particularly women who are more not self-conscious, but socially aware. Men are pitifully socially aware. They are that way in adolescence, and they remain that way pretty much. So yeah, when you get married, your wife has to tell you can't go out looking like that. You have to change that. You have to put this on. Like, what are you doing? Oh, I don't care. Well, I care. Okay, so then you just, if you're smart, you accept the guidance here, and you better not fight it. And you recognize that there are things there that are things that you lack that your wife doesn't. But it's that. It's not sexual desire. She wants to be in the inner ring. She wants to be with the in crowd. Yes? The eldest, of course. Yeah, it's ours. She's been going that way. It's a progressive thing. Yeah. Right, and what's interesting about this now is what Jill says in at the end of the story then helps us to see what motivates that character earlier on. So why she's saying, is that really true? She's actually not thinking about what's in front of her. She's thinking about the consequences for her if she is that, and so she's concerned about that all along. Doesn't want it to be true because it will mean rejection on her part. She won't be able to be part of the cool kids. I think that's the case. Yes.
And yet she was at the stone table.
I know. Yeah, which is sort of terrifying. along with her sister, at the stone table. Susan was there. She rode on Aslan's back. She went back into it. She loved Aslan. Aslan loved her. He gave her gifts. Also of importance, which the Pullmans of the world, and they are missing this because they think that in the story, this is the end of the story, as in a realistic portrait. She hasn't been sent to hell. She hasn't been sent to hell. She hasn't died yet. She's still alive. In 1957, a boy wrote Lewis with some concern for the fate of Susan. Here's the reply he received. The books don't tell us what happened to Susan. She's left alive in this world at the end, having turned into a rather silly, conceited young woman. But there is plenty of time for her to mend, and perhaps she will get to Aslan's country in the end, in her own way, end quote. He doesn't condemn her. He just says she's not there now. Why would Lewis, the storyteller, the educator, want to present this as a possibility at the end? Because his audience has these temptations. It's a possibility. You may be tempted the way Susan was. He sees it happening. He cares for his audience. He puts it that way in the end. Because in the end, I don't think that's going to persuade Pullman. I'm in agreement with Alan Jacobs on this, because he doesn't say she is going to get there. He says perhaps. And that's going to be enough for Pullman. Everybody should be able to get into paradise, into heaven. And he wants that heaven to be with them wherever they choose to be. Whatever they choose, Aslan, if he's really good, will endorse that view and support it because he's loving, and to love is to embrace everybody's choices that they see as good for them. So God is I will say, a child abuser at that point. He's going to flip it on its head. God is the child abuser because he will allow you whatever horrible thing that you choose or good, he'll treat them equally. And he'll treat good and evil as effectively the same thing and give them an equal reward. So it doesn't matter if you get attacked or you're the attacker, I'm going to give you the same outcome just like the bullies were in Experiment House. That's Pullman's idea of justice here. And a good God will treat people the way the schoolmaster does in Experiment House. He'll take the bullies in and sit down, have tea with them and chat and understand their point of view, and they'll become buddies. They'll get in the inner ring. By the way, Lewis addresses this in The Great Divorce. We'll get to this very shortly. All the ghosts in The Great Divorce can stay in heaven if they choose, but most of them don't choose to do so, because in their lifetimes they made themselves into the kinds of people who no longer desire what heaven has to offer. They're interested in these things. They don't want the theology of the cross. They want fame. They want to be an insider. They want to be famous. They don't want this, so they choose that. And they want that. They're not interested in this. So you can stay here if you want. They don't want to be there. They don't want to be in heaven. It's distasteful to them, just like the dwarves. They can't get out of there fast enough. So it's the exclusivity of Lewis's position that really offends them. The fact that anybody can be excluded from the real Narnia. That's what offends them. So again, what offends them is the view of truth. That he holds to a truth. There's a truth and there's a falsehood. They are pantheists, and therefore that's their fundamental objection. Truth and falsehood are perspectival. So is good and evil. So is right and wrong. So is beautiful and ugly. Those are perspectival. So in the end, I think the position is ludicrous. But again, I think the modern reader who is schooled in pantheist schools like Education House might find themselves on Pullman's side with this. This is unfair to Susan. How could this be? Other comments or questions? What do you want me to talk about here? So I got a number. Yes. Oh, yes. Okay, so Father Time. So thank you. Let me find it. Yes. So Father Time is portrayed as basically this giant on his back. And it's in relation to, it's a great question, because I've just said that the historical perspective is in Lewis's target hairs. And Father Time is connected with this, but Father Time is not the same thing as a historical perspective. Time is a creation of the created order, just like the heavens and the earth are. Remember, God is outside space and time, according with Christian theology. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, it says in the first line of Genesis. In other words, he includes those conditions that we call time, which we can measure, like the clock on the wall. We can count our days. We can see things in terms of chronology, one thing following the next in that sense. God is, however, outside space and time is one of his creations. So Father Time is actually something that will also be renovated in the new heavens and the new earth. And so time can be reversed in some ways, and everything becomes untrue. Well, how does it put this? Can you tell me what chapter that is in, the Father Time, if you can find it? Because I'm not going to find it immediately. 14. Okay. Yes. Night Falls in Narnia. Then Jill and Eustace remembered how long once ago in the deep caves beneath these moors they had seen a great giant asleep and been told that his name was Father Time and that he would wake on the day the world ended. Yes, said Aslan. Note that day, if what Lewis has said is true, this is the world. The assumption of Pullman is that day is for everybody all at once, but it's not. It's for them. And Susan is still alive, and so that day is a very long time. On the last day, it sounds like a time period and not one day in the way Lewis is interpreting it. But back to this. Yes, said Aslan, though they had not spoken. He's read their minds. While he lay dreaming, his name was Time. Now that he is awake, he will have a new one. Then the great giant raised a horn to his mouth. They could see this by the change of the black shape he made against the stars, like a Caravaggio. Except the other way. It's light in the background, dark in the foreground. After that, quite a bit later, because sound travels so slowly, they heard the sound of the horn, high and terrible, yet of a strange, deadly beauty. Immediately the sky became full of shooting stars. Even one shooting star is a fine thing to see, but these were dozens, and then scores, and then hundreds, till it was like silver rain, and it went on, and when it had gone on for some while, one or two of them began to think that there was another great dark shape against the sky as well as the giants. It was in a different place, right overhead, up in the very roof of the sky, as you might call it. Perhaps it's a cloud, thought Edmund. At any rate, there were no stars there, just blackness. But all around the downpour of stars went on, and then the starless patch began to grow, spreading further and further out from the center of the sky, and presently a quarter of the whole sky was black, and then a half, and then at last the rain of shooting stars was going on only low down near the horizon. With a thrill of wonder, and there was some terror in it too, they all suddenly realized what was happening. The spreading blackness was not a cloud at all, it was emptiness. Because what is the creation is going away. Remember the stars that created. And the black part of the sky was the part in which there's no stars left. All the stars were falling. Aslan had called them home, Lewis's interpretation. The last few seconds before the rain of stars had quite ended were very exciting. Stars began falling all around them. But stars in that world are not the great flaming globes they are in ours. They are people. Edmund and Lucy had once met one. So now they found showers of glittering people, all with long hair like burning silver and spears like white-hot metal, rushing down to them out of the black air, swifter than falling stones. They made a hissing noise as they landed and burnt the grass, and all these stars glided past them and stood somewhere behind a little to the right, etc. And the light behind them was so strong that it lit up even the slopes of the northern moors, and something was moving there, enormous animals, etc. And then from far off, at first, sounds of wailing that get nearer, and they start to hear the scamper of the little feet, the patting of big paws, the click-clack of light hooves, and at last, out of the shadow of the trees, racing up the hill for dear life, by thousands and by millions, came all kinds of creatures, talking beasts, dwarfs, satyrs, fauns, giants, calormenes, men from Archenland, monopods, and strange unearthly things from the remote islands or the unknown western lands, and all of these ran up to the doorway where Aslan stood. And then Runewit calls further in and higher up, and so forth, a little bit further on there. But these, at this point, they cease to be talking beasts, and everything that happened that was sorrowful becomes untrue. So it's a reversal, and it's the reversal exactly that we perceive at the cross. The undoing of everything that seemed to be so is in fact so. Now this is gone. All this will be wiped out, taken out, and this remains, and that's the part of the new creation where, remember, there's no sin or dying or sickness or shame or tears or death. That's what Lewis is portraying here. But everything that was good in the world is preserved and restored and renewed. Everything that's not of that world is being removed from it. And so, said Peter, night falls on Narnia. What, Lucy, you're not crying with Aslan ahead and all of us here? Don't try to stop me, Peter, said Lucy. I am sure Aslan would not. I am sure it was not wrong to mourn for Narnia. Think of all that lies dead and frozen behind that door. Yes, and I did hope, said Jill, that it might go on forever. I knew our world couldn't. I did think Narnia might. I saw it begin, said the Lord Diggory. I did not think I would live to see it die. Sirs, said Tyrion, the ladies do well to weep. See, I do so myself. I have seen my mother's death. What world but Narnia have I ever known? It were no great virtue, but great discourtesy if we did not mourn. So the mourning is not wrong, nonetheless, because why would they weep? Because of what was good there. Of course they're going to weep for what the perceived lost goodness. There's not wrong. You're not going to be condemned for that. However, the greater glory of what comes from further up and further in is the recompense for that. Everything they loved about the old Narnia is that much more true in this Narnia because it's unblemished by the reign of, or the consequences of what happened right back in the magician's nephew. It's being undone. And what the White Witch did, which was broken by Aslan in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And all of those things are starting to, so it speeds up in the end through this small little portal. Oh, and that phrase, what was the phrase there? That they're in this small tent, and they talked about, there's a reference to the tent, which Lewis would know, refers to the incarnation, where the Lord took on flesh and pitched his tent amongst us. John's Gospel, John 1:14, he pitched his tent. And there was once something that was so large that in the cradle that could not contain the whole world. I can't remember the exact phrase, and I've just mangled it. Bigger on the inside than it appears on the outside. And again, it's an illustration of exactly the same thing. There seems no significance to the babe of Bethlehem. From the Roman imperial perspective, this is of no consequence whatsoever. And yet, the babe of Bethlehem is the beginning of the Savior of Nazareth who dies at Calvary and redeems the whole world. So that's it. There was once in our world, our stable, which contained something like that. Yeah, but it's expressing the same theology of the cross in fit terms. Anyway, I've run out of time. I apologize for that, but I hope you enjoyed it.